Hello, everyone. Today we are going to talk about how to study chess or an approach to studying chess. And this is a method that I believe is very effective and has worked for me for years during my most active playing days. And even now, when I want to refresh, I use the same methods. And that is studying themes in chess. A lot of uh, beginner chess players, I would say all the way up to like 18, 1900 probably, spend an inordinate amount of time studying chess openings. It's a To me, it's a very bad habit to um, get into, and it's a great affliction for many chess players because obviously, um, the game starts with the opening, and so uh, it makes sense to try to not lose in the first 10 moves of the game. And of course, this is important. But unfortunately, when we don't have coaches or direction, a lot of times we, just formulate bad habits and then we repeat them, and then we find ourselves stuck at, 1800 forever or 1500 or what have you. And of course, we play the opening like, Magnus Carlsen or Karyakin or somebody like that. But our middle game and end game is terrible. And we pigeonhole ourselves also, where we become specialists, at some variation, and we don't really ever become good at chess at all or develop proper understanding. So I want to get right into this. This is going to be a short video, and hopefully it can serve as a template that you can apply to your own chess study, and hopefully it would help you to improve. So, okay, so how to improve at chess? How to approach it? One way is to study chess based on themes. In other words, again, avoiding openings, right? We look at general themes, right, that will transcend the topic of openings, right? In other words, the theme will apply uh, to all types of openings, and this will help you greatly. So, for this video, an example, we're going to talk about the isolated pawn, all right? And I like talking about the isolated pawn because there's the weakness of the isolated pawn, and there's also the strength of the isolated pawn. So you can play with it or against it. My first suggestion is if you are like studying a particular theme, so in this case, isolated pawn, and you want to learn all about the isolated pawn, I suggest you start playing openings using the isolated pawn. So you take on the isolated pawn. So what openings have isolated pawns? Okay, there's many of them actually. So let's just look at a couple. So let me just turn this on real quick so I can speed through this. So for instance, you have your Alapin variation, right? C3, D5, E takes, Queen takes D5, D4, Knight F6, Knight F3, E6, E3, C takes D4, C takes D4. So there's your Alapin variation in the Sicilian. In this case, white has an isolated pawn. Okay? What else? Well, French defense, um, the exchange variation. And white has an isolated pawn. Another example, Caro-Kann, Panov variation. Knight C3, E6, Knight 3, Knight C6, C takes D5, Knight takes D5. Again, white has taken on the isolated pawn. All right. Another example, Queen's Gambit accepted. D4, D5, C4, D takes, Knight F3. Oops, sorry. Knight F6, E3, E6, Bishop takes, C5, hitting the center, castle, A6, of course, with this idea. And now the counterattack in the center. And again, white has the isolated pawn. So I can go on and on, again, other lines in the French defense, Slav defense, Queen's Gambit. Everybody knows about the Tarrasch variation. Okay, so notice how the isolated pawn theme crops up in all of those different openings. All right, so it would be silly to sorry about that. It would be silly to concentrate just on particular opening. All right, it's better to learn a theme, because if you learn the principles of the isolated pawn, good and bad, it doesn't matter what opening that you uh, enter. There's a, a quote I read from Musashi Miyamoto in the Book of Five Rings, and usually it's applied to martial arts, but you can apply it anywhere. And one of my favorite quotes is learn one thing, or know one thing to know 10,000 things. Okay, and it's about simplifying, right? Your learning. Okay, instead of learning all of these different openings. Okay, what you want to learn is you want to learn one idea or one concept that you can apply to all of them. All right, and this is where the idea of learning, using themes, steps into place. So here we had the isolated pawn, and I already showed you about 4 or 5 different openings where the isolated pawn um, shows up. So if you just learn the principles of the isolated pawn, okay, that will save you a lot of studying time. All right. What are the principles of isolated pawns? Well, okay, when you have the isolated pawn, you want to keep the pieces on the board. Okay, that's the basic principle. When you're fighting against the isolated pawn, you want to exchange as many pieces as you can. All right, those are the overlying principles of dealing with the isolated pawn. So when you have it, you want to keep the pieces on the board. When you're fighting against it, you want to exchange as many pieces as possible. Why is that? Well, with few pieces left on the board, okay, the isolated pawn must be protected. Okay, so if you have less pieces on the board, it's harder to protect. Okay, so this is why the strategy is usually to try to exchange as many pieces as possible. All right, so the pawn becomes a big weakness. All right, now on the other hand, if you have a lot of pieces on the board, all right, the pawn is protected, and you can use it to actually blow up the opponent's center. Moves like d5, what have you, um, or launch an attack on the king side. All right, so again, those are just like general guidelines. Of course, each position is different. All right. What else can we say? I actually made a video on going over games on the isolated pawn, and I'll provide a link to this video that you can put them together to study isolated pawns. Actually, I made 2 videos. One is just about the positives and the strength of the isolated pawn, where I go through many games. And this brings me to my next suggestion, is that once you understand these general principles like that I'm laying down in the video, what you want to do is look at a bunch of Grandmaster games. Or it doesn't even have to be Grandmaster games, but you want to look at relatively strong players. Look at a bunch of games with nothing but isolated pawns. And what I would do, you could use your database and all that stuff. What I would do is, if first of all, I would look at the positive side of the isolated pawn. So I would look at only games where the side with the isolated pawn is victorious. Nothing but those games. I'll look at, maybe 10, 15, 20 of those games. All right, and just see what's going on. How are the pieces being moved? How are the, what are the trends in these games? After I have that down, then I'll start looking at the other side. Okay, the side that is fighting against the isolated pawns, I will look at all the games where that side is won, and then after that, you'll have a good understanding of isolated pawns. Then from there, once you understand that, then you start playing. Say you want to play, uh, you know, uh, start playing with the isolated pawn. So now you choose your opening where you have a high percentage of getting isolated pawn. And what's good about it is you can play it with white or black. Okay, like I just showed you how you could play it from, say, from the black side, with the Queen's Gambit accepted, for example, or you could play it from the white side with the, for instance, Panov attack in the Carol Khan, or exchange variation in the French. All right. So once you get the principles down, all right, you can play different openings, but with the idea of just getting to the isolated pawn. So you're not, wasting your time studying variations, but now you have a deep understanding of chess. All right. So again, I'll post those links to this video so that you can study the isolated pawn. But that's just one theme. And then once you learn that theme, there's many other themes you can learn in chess. The Polgars came out with a good book many years ago. One is called The Middle Game, and I think the other is called Chess, where they break down chess into themes, like for instance, like space advantage, attack on f7, attack on g6, attack on h7, and in those sections, all you see is games where, for example, the all you see is games where the game is concluded by an attack on f7. So you're seeing that over and over and over and again till your mind gets used to the patterns. Or if you're studying space advantage, you're seeing nothing. You're seeing games with nothing but space advantage, by one side. Okay, and again, after a while of looking at all those games, you learn how to play with a space advantage. Okay, so in conclusion, what have we learned by looking at all those games with the isolated pawn, or what have I learned rather? I'll just give you the rundown real quick, and then again you can go and check the other videos. But one, when you have the isolated pawn, what is the isolated pawn doing for you? It's giving you control over e5 and c5 squares, as you can see here in this example. This example is just it's not example. It's just it's a variation on the game between Artur Yusupov and Anthony Miles. But um, so you can see right here, you have control over these two squares, e4 and e5 and c5. Okay. Now, as a result of that, this gives white active squares to move his pieces on. All right, and gives you a little bit of space advantage. All right. What else? We talked about this. The breakthrough d5. This is a major threat. All right. It often gives white the initiative when, or whoever has an isolated pawn initiative, when he can make this break. That's why. Well, we'll get into the other side later, but this is why this move is very important if you can get it. Also, king side attacking opportunities, attacking on f7. Okay. Sometimes the knight gets sacrificed here, and as you notice, you see this bishop here, and all of this combined creates king side opportunities. What else does this isolated pawn allow? Many times the rook will come up via the e file or c file and transfer on the third rank. Many times there's sacrifices on h6. If you had the bishops on this diagonal, a bishop here, for instance, and queen here. All right. Of course, play on the open files, the e file and on the c file. Okay. And those are your major themes when you have the isolated pawn. Okay. Real quick, what are you doing when you don't have the isolated pawn, when you're playing against it? Well, we've alluded to this push and all that. Well, control over d5, which is usually done by the best blockading piece, which is a knight. All right. Some variations, again, when the bishop and queen are lined up on the B1 to H7 diagonal, many times the move G6 is played to stop these kind of threats along the diagonal. Okay, which means that many times black will try to keep his dark square bishop so that when he does weaken his dark squares, the dark square bishop can fill in. All right. Okay. Those are just some basic, basic strategies that black might try to employ. There's many more, but again, when you go over enough games, you'll be able to make your own list of do's and don'ts for both sides, and this will make you a better player. So, um, I'm gonna post those links, and any questions, just hit me in the inbox below. I'll be glad to answer and talk about that. And I'll go over some other videos. We'll look at some other themes, and try to just break them down real quick. I do have other videos like on phalanx, which you may know as pawn storming or whatever. That's another theme, like how to you know use pawn storms or phalanx in chess. Um, so that'll be the conclusion of this video. Um, uh, please check my links below. Please support my channel. That would be greatly appreciated via donation if you can spare. And also, look in the links also for DVD/books for the opening that has appeared on the board today. We were talking about isolated pawns. Um, so what I'm going to do is just post DVDs on the Queen's Gambit accepted here, and in the links below. And I hope you enjoy, and I will see you guys on the next video.